We're here.
We're here. We made it, finally.
The illusion of consensus is now at the network school, officially. This is our very first Q&A, and a lot's been going on in our life. We've relocated to Malaysia at this pretty interesting, innovative space called the Network School, founded by Balaji. We're going to go through a few questions, some that have come from the audience, and some questions based on things I've been writing about, thinking about in the last several months, several weeks, several days. So I think this is going to be a really fun space to periodically, like once a month, go over some interesting questions as they relate to things I'm writing about and thinking about, like I said. So let's go through it today. So Parker, for people who don't know, Parker is my business manager, and he's going to be helping facilitate some of these Q&As. Parker, do you just want to briefly introduce yourself and kind of what you're doing here?
Yeah, so I'm helping Rav with the finance area as well as anything business structure and helping to make sure that we actually turn this into an operation and produce good content for you guys. So we're hoping to set a good routine and make this a consistent thing. So.
Yeah, I think we're a really good combination because I'm more about the ideas and like, let's do this, let's do that, let's get this person on, that person on. And then Parker's more about the structure and like, how do we actually make this work operationally? So I think it's a really cool combination. We also have my friend David in the background who's helping with the camera. He's waving at me now. I think he's going to come on the podcast too at some point. And I think overall, the vibrational frequency of being at NS, being with you guys here, and lots of interesting people that I've met, has really like elevated my own understanding of different things and my own inner process and experience of reality. So a lot of ideas have been bubbling in my mind in the last few weeks, last month and a half since we've been here. So I'm excited to dig into some topics. So let's start off the Q&A, Parker, with the first question.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about where we are, Rav. Like, what are we doing here? We moved to the network school, I'll say that. So it's in Malaysia. So tell the audience, so how did we get here? What's the plan? Did you intend to be here as long as we are?
Yeah, so it's a pretty crazy story, and I've had to explain this probably 100 times now to different people. Like, you're in Malaysia? Like, what are you doing? Like, you've left Vancouver? Like, are you doing the podcast there? What's going on? So we came to the Network State Conference in Singapore beginning of October, and the plan was to just be there for the conference and listen to some interesting thinkers like Andrew Huberman, Balaji, of course, Brian Johnson, various others as well. But then we also planned a quick tour of NS as well. So we did the tour that weekend, the Saturday, Sunday, and a lot of things happened. But basically, we checked it out. We thought it was pretty awesome. Met some really cool people, liked the vibes, the focus on health and wellness and fitness. Met some really intelligent people, had some very deep conversations, like unexpectedly, about consciousness and psychedelics and meditation and spirituality and AI, technology, like all these things. And it was just inspiring a lot of interesting ideas and concepts for what I want to do on the podcast. And then, long story short, we found ourselves in a position where we could do the podcast here and we could stay here for a while. We talked to some people at NS who were really interested in having us here doing our podcast. One individual in particular who really helped facilitate our presence here and like staying here long term. So we thought about it long and hard. We consulted with various people, but it was a pretty easy decision because of the lifestyle, wellness, focus on health, productivity, socializing, networking, the network state. That's the concept, which I should explain that too. So the network school, for people who don't know, it's an internet first, land second community where basically we're in this big hotel together, about 300, 400 of us, if I remember correctly. And it's people that are digital nomads, remote workers, people who work online and are working on various interesting projects. And so we're all just together in this space, collaborating, networking, talking, bouncing ideas off of each other. And there's lots of workshops here. fitness and exercise, sports related workshops, and like writing workshops, and even spiritual communities. It's like meditation, breath work, yoga, the cold plunge, sauna, all of that. And so all those things together, just the community and meeting really interesting people, like honestly, some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. So all that together, the community, the fitness, wellness, networking, really made it an easy decision to stay here and do the podcast. Parker, I'm curious too, for on your end, if you want to share very briefly, like I'm sure you have similar ideas, but was it also kind of an easy decision for you to be here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think both of us going from Canada, and I think it's a very independent place to be these days. Everyone's very isolated, and coming here and just having community and lots of people to talk to. There's constant events being planned. So I think both of us really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah. That's really well said. Like for both of us, I mean, Parker, he has an engineering background, so a little bit different. But for me, the last few years, I've made a name for myself in podcasting, writing, and journalism. And like a lot of people who work remotely, finding community and friendships and having more real life experiences can be hard when all your work is done through a laptop and you're virtually, podcasting with people across the world. So this is really like the best case scenario for me here, where I can work online virtually, but also connect with people in real life. And we're going to get into some of that with the next question.
Yeah, so we've already talked about this a little bit, but we want to know how your experience has been at NS so far. And you've been writing a lot recently about finding balance in your life. And maybe you want to just quickly touch on that and how you've been managing to do that with all the interesting stuff going on and distractions. And so,
Yeah, so I've been writing about this on my personal Substack, The Meta Mystic, which is different from my Illusion of Consensus Substack, which is more kind of scientific. But people, like, we can link to those articles in the video here. But personally, in my life, I've been thinking a lot about over the last year about finding balance, and I've written about this at length. But basically, I made a name for myself in podcasting and writing in 2020, and spent a lot of time working hard, writing hard, doing podcasts with interesting people. And also, it was the time during COVID. I also, post high school, some friends moved away for college, some friendships disintegrated. And I was in a pretty strange place trying to figure out like who I am and what I'm doing. And I really kind of lost touch with like real life experience. And I became very invested in my work life. And really like 2020 to 2023 was like, several hours a day in the basement, just reading, writing, podcasting every day, reading, writing, podcasting. And that was cool for a period. And there's a case to be made for concentrated times in life where you're hyper productive and like working really hard on a specific thing. So I'm thankful for that time, but it was also a very lonely and isolating time. And so a big mission for me this year in 2025 has been to have more fun in life. And also, I didn't mention this yet, but also had some mental health challenges in 2022, 2023, a lot of issues with anxiety and psychosomatic issues. And that also prevented me from being more socially engaged. It was just all the inner turmoil and just very like acute anxiety that manifested in my body. So I spent those 3 or 4 years very much isolated. And so this year I've made a very conscious decision to get out more, concerts, raves, parties, connecting with more people, making more friends. And coming at NS, to tie it to the present here, I didn't expect this to happen, honestly. I thought like productivity would go up, but it's kind of temporarily went down a little bit in a really healthy way, because I made so many interesting friends and like people, like if I'm just being honest, like very intelligent people, but also people that I've had some really good laughs with and like really connected on a human level, and honestly reminded me of some of the most fun times I've had in high school. Some friends from like Portugal, Syria, Romania, my friend David here, and also some like really deep conversations, like I mentioned earlier, about spirituality and consciousness. And so to me, it's really important in life to not be too focused on one extreme or the other. Like for some young people, they're partying too much, they're having too much fun, they're not focused, they don't have an ambition. And for other people, it's more people that we know, they're hyper ambitious, and all they're thinking about is their work and how to make money and how to grow their brand and how to increase their net worth and all those things. And I see a lot of people on both extremes, and balance is tough. But coming at NS, I've made a lot of great friendships, which has been really nourishing. And really the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on work and the vision of the podcast, which we're going to get into in a second. So let's move on to that.
Cool. So the next question ties in well. So we want to know, what is the vision for the podcast moving forward? What do you intend? How many episodes should we expect every week? Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot over the past year about where this podcast should go, and in line with what I just said, like kind of figuring out self-growth and inner narratives and external experiences of reality and the world around me. I'm going to be doing a lot of podcasts on mental health and self-growth. That's kind of the biggest bucket of this podcast. And the second bucket is going to be relationships and dating, which is a totally new direction for me. But for me, and we'll get into this in another question too, I'm most known for my work on politics, in 2020 writing about Black Lives Matter and identity politics and cancel culture, and then COVID and big pharma and these things. But I've done a lot of soul searching over the past year and have realized that I also want to focus on topics that directly relate to me and directly relate to young people right now in particular, and the issues that they're facing. And so, there are so many political podcasts and news-oriented shows, and I just feel like that's not the most important thing that I could be focusing on. But I do think mental health and wellness and like psychology, consciousness, psychedelics, meditation, different kinds of psychotherapy. So I'll be exploring those topics, and then we're going to be having on some dating coaches and relationship experts on the podcast as well, like Elsa Morak. She's a popular dating coach. And then the third bucket, which I'll occasionally dip into, is going to be politics and ideology and culture war issues. I did the podcast with Dave Smith a couple months ago. We have a couple other ones coming up, which we'll talk about later in this Q&A. But those are the three big buckets. And also occasionally I'll kind of throw in a wild card, which is my interest in music. And so I'll be doing kind of some music reviews here and there as well. So that's the plan: mental health and wellness, relationships, and then occasionally when I feel really galvanized or inspired to talk about something politically, I will talk about it. But politics is just less and less of a focus to me, and more of a focus to me is like what's happening in my life and like what are some ways to optimize wellness and mental health. And I think a lot of young people are interested on how to navigate this brave new world of dating and mental health, and like what does it mean to be a man in 2025? What does it mean to be a woman in 2025? And how do you navigate relationships? So I'm really interested to dive deeply into those topics.
Yeah, and we'd love to know from the audience as well what type of content you want to hear more of. I'm sure there will be some politics, and I'm sure there'll be a few spicy debates coming up in the future. So yeah, we'll definitely listen to your feedback. But we want to kind of vary it up a little bit. So yeah, try some different things. Rav, the next question leads in well. Why won't you talk more about politics?
Yeah.
You haven't been writing much about politics. You haven't been speaking much about it. Do you intend to do more, or is that kind of it?
Yeah. So I already kind of touched on this in the last question, but yeah, I became very well known for my writing on politics. But I remember talking this once with Jordan Peterson over dinner about the differences in like talking about macro level problems, and like politics is kind of like one of the most macro level things you can talk about. What's happening economically, what's happening societally, with different kinds of governance, more liberal politics, more conservative styles of governance, and what's happening politically with immigration, economics, crypto. A lot of people are interested in crypto here at NS. There's some interesting conversations to have on the political side of things. But to me, the big kind of jarring feeling that I had in 2020, 2021 that led to a departure from politics was just this sense of like, I became well known and greatly respected for my writing on politics. And so occasionally someone will see me on the street or like getting DMs on Instagram or Twitter and like, oh my God, you're such a good writer. You're an amazing podcaster and you're making a lot of sense. And the way you talk about identity politics and cancel culture, or you're writing on vaccine mandates and standing up for free speech is just so brave and noble. And like getting a lot of compliments and people who were greatly admiring what I was doing. But on the inside, like psychologically, I was an anxious mess. I was very depressed, lonely, socially disconnected, didn't have a lot of meaningful relationships in my life, was very confused, wasn't sure why I was so like, depressed all the time, aside from the more surface level, explanations of just not having enough friends or social connections. But I was just really stuck and not sure what I was doing in life other than this one aspect of my life, which was writing about politics and what was happening with cancel culture and all these different topics. And so to me, it was, I don't know if hypocrisy is the right word, but I just felt this jarring sense of like, people see me as this really brave, admirable person, but yet my inner state all the time is just ridden with anxiety, shame, this depressive feeling of meaninglessness, nihilism. And so I was like, that needs to be resolved. And I can't just keep putting on this facade of I have things figured out politically while my personal life or mentally I'm kind of a mess. So I decided to just spend a lot more time watching podcasts, reading books on psychology and wellness and self-growth, and started going to therapy, tried meditation, psychedelic assisted therapy. And so I just became very interested in that personally, and then connected with various people on that topic. And so I'm like, so why not focus more on that instead? And so having more conversations on wellness and mental health just felt more in line with what I was interested in at the time and what I'm still exploring right now. And I just feel like it's just more proactive and actionable for people to listen to a conversation about how you can rewrite your inner narrative or different kinds of psychotherapy for different contexts in life, rather than just like, let's spend another 2 hours talking about transgenderism or like identity politics. And those issues deserve a lot of time and like we should talk about it. But I think there's just a greater importance I'm sensing with writing and talking about mental health and wellness and just like the science of like how people can change. That's kind of one way of putting it. So, yeah.
Good answer. We got a question from the audience here.
Yeah, and actually, just to briefly interrupt, we should also explain a little bit more like NS. So, like, people can apply to NS. They can apply online. We can link to it below. It's really for
Balaji's book here.
Yeah. So this is a place for innovators, founders, and entrepreneurs. And so while we're not super tech or crypto focused, we are content creators. And so this is a really good place for us to create content. And like I said earlier, there's like the synergistic effect of meeting so many interesting people and bouncing ideas off of each other all the time is really cool. So I think this has been a really good move, and I think it's going to lead to better podcasts, more thoughtful conversations about different topics. And I'm already feeling like super inspired by all the different conversations that I've had in the last month and a half. So moving forward, I think people are going to see me talk about a lot of things that I've never talked about, including relationships and dating, like I mentioned before. And so I'm just really excited to share that with the audience. So just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, and we have lots of in-person interviews coming as well. So I think we're looking forward to that.
Yeah,
a nice podcast studio here set up. So
and we appreciate Balaji for letting us use the studio here. So yeah, lots of in-person interviews coming up.
Yeah. Okay, this question's from the audience, Rav. So what is your relationship with Joe Rogan? And he's given you shout outs before and shared your work. So maybe just share a little bit of background there. I know we recently posted an episode with Mark Cuban, and that was inspired by Joe Rogan. So maybe just share how that came to be.
Yeah. So Joe Rogan, the person that everyone wants to talk about all the time. So it's interesting. I've got a couple messages recently, and I think people seem to think that I'm closer with him than I am. They think I'm like buddies with Rogan. So somebody recently messaged me, a somewhat well-known person, a journalist in Canada who has some book coming out. He's like, "Yo, Rav, can you connect me with your buddy Joe Rogan? I'd love to go on his show to promote my book, and here's what I'm doing." And a couple of people have kind of alluded to that before, that he and I have some like tight relationship or something like that. And while that would be cool, I just want to be clear, like, Joe has been a great supporter from a distance. I guess I can briefly share. In 2020, I wrote an article about why his podcast, I felt like, was the most important platform for having rigorous, thoughtful conversations across politics and health and wellness. And that article went super viral for all the wrong reasons. It was published in the Globe and Mail. Audience kind of leans left, and Canada's kind of leans left broadly, and so people on Twitter were getting very mad about me writing this article complimenting Rogan, and it went mega viral. And then Rogan reached out eventually over DMs and said, "Hey, I appreciate you writing that article. Great job, keep it up, and best of luck." And I was like, "Oh, cool, that's awesome." And then after that, I was writing a lot about COVID and big pharma and vaccine mandates. And around middle of 2021, this is early 2022, Mark Cuban was just eviscerating Rogan for his coverage on vaccine mandates and vaccine myocarditis. And then I was writing about it at the same time. And then Joe, he sent a couple of my articles on Substack about vaccine side effects to Mark when Mark was attacking him. And then Joe just hit me up one time and said, "Hey, Mark's attacking me right now, and he's talking about vaccine myocarditis not being a big issue and this and that, and can you debate him over email?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, like I can do that." We had this long email exchange, and Joe was kind of watching what was happening there, and that led to the podcast that we just released with Mark Cuban on that topic. I just hit up Mark this year. I was like, "Hey, we had this email debate. Why don't we just do it on my podcast?" And then he kindly said yes, and we had a fun boxing match on the podcast. But that's pretty much been the extent of the relationship with Joe over the years, is his support for my writing on COVID and also psychedelics. He's shared a couple things. Me and Dr. Matt Johnson, psychedelic scientist who's been on the podcast, we wrote this psychedelic policy reform agenda for the Trump administration last year, which Joe supported and promoted. But overall, like, occasionally Joe and I will, I'll text him something or he'll send me something and we'll just text back and forth. But it is kind of funny though that I've actually never talked to him over the phone, and we've just like texted like a lot over the past like 3-4 years. Like every now and then something interesting in the news will come up, or sometimes something just silly or funny that I think he would laugh at. I'll just like send it to him randomly, and then we'll just kind of chat about it. But that's pretty much it. We're not like tight buddies, but he's just been very generous, and I would like to acknowledge that. Like, he, despite having no like personal like intimate connection with me, he's been very generous in supporting my work. And actually, I'll just share briefly. I was in Austin, Texas in early 2024. Visiting UATX, the new anti-woke University of Austin. And I just hit up Joe. I was like, "Oh, I'm in town and I'd love to check out your comedy club." And he went out of his way to be like, "Hey, like, I'll get you tickets to the show. Like, we got you. We'll put you on the guest list." And I was like, "Oh, you don't have to do that." He's like, "No, like, I want to do this." And that, like, to me just shows his character and like how much he cares about people, like just going out of his way and doing things just to support people and like enrich their experience. Like, there was no incentive for him to do that other than just like showing some love and support. And so that really meant a lot. So love to talk to him in the future, but no, we're not buddies, and no, I will not be fielding inquiries about people who want to go on his show, but would love to talk to him one day. And I'm sure I'll talk to him at some point. Good.
Yeah. And if the audience wants to check out that episode, maybe we'll link it in the description. With the one with Mark Cuban, you guys should actually check that one out because it was a fiery debate. Good. Now, next question here is about Sam Harris. Similar type of question. What is your relationship with Sam like? I know you've had few discussions with Sam about COVID being one. And you've also chatted with him on the phone about meditation, and you use his app regularly and support his work. But you also have criticized him openly, and you've had some email exchanges with him about vaccine advocacy. So, would you have him on the podcast? Maybe comment on those things.
Yeah. It's interesting. This Q&A structure, by the way, is loosely inspired by Sam's new Q&A structure with his manager. So just like he does the Q&As with his manager, I've got my manager here. It's a very similar format. And part of why I think it's important to talk about some of these relationships or loose connections with some of these people like Sam and Joe is that it elucidates some of the complex dynamics of how to navigate friendship, politics, personal connection, spiritual connection. And so Sam's been talking a lot about, and over the last couple of years, he's talked a lot about his relationships with people like Joe Rogan, Maajid Nawaz, Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, and there's been this disintegration of the quote unquote intellectual dark web over the last few years as people like the IDW was this famous phenomenon. It was written by Barry Weiss in the New York Times. People like Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, Ben Rogan, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris, people who have very different views that are coming together and have great admiration and respect for each other despite vehement disagreement on a number of topics. But that really fell apart during COVID, and now there's been a lot of hostility, a lot of frustration and anger among certain people. And so Sam's recently talked about his connections and relationship with Joe Rogan and people like Maajid Nawaz, and how challenging it is to navigate some of these things and just what kind of ethical compass you should have. And so it's worth I think it's important to get into that. And so for Sam, for him, he and I first talked in late 2021. We had a really good conversation over the phone about meditation, psychedelics, and consciousness and self-transcendence. And we can link to that in the description below. And I've just been a really big fan of his meditation app, and primarily because he's been such an effective kind of distiller of the most powerful wisdom from Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism, and really just stripping all of the superstition and dogma and explaining in a very easy, lucid manner what meditation is and how do we experience contentment and unconditional love, and how do we just live a better, more holistically integrated life. And so he's been a very compelling teacher to me. So we had a really good conversation about that in 2021. And then in 2022, 2023, when vaccines came into the picture, vaccine mandates became a hot button conversation. Sam was talking about it, Brett Weinstein, Joe Rogan, and so all these tensions and kind of rivalries kind of started. And I watched Sam's coverage on COVID vaccines and just felt like he was being irresponsible in promoting the COVID vaccine for everyone. And he made some kind of brief exceptions for young boys, but his overall recommendation was people should rush and get it right away, and it makes sense for virtually everyone to do it. And I just felt like that for someone who's so scientific and objective, that was not in line with the scientific data and what was conversations I was having with Jay Bhattacharya and Tracy Beth Hogue and other epidemiologists, and it became very clear that the mRNA vaccines had a lot of side effects. And this one study showed a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate. And so to me, just like Sam was criticizing Joe for irresponsibly talking about vaccine side effects, which I think some of that criticism was unwarranted. And I think Sam was listening to some experts that really got COVID wrong, like Eric Topol and Dr. Christakis. And so I emailed Sam. I was like, hey, man, I think you're getting this wrong. And to his credit, he did take it very seriously. And he respected me, reaching out and in a very generous, nice way, not attacking his character, which I should just take a pause and mention, I've criticized some of his positions on COVID, but I've never once descended into this rhetoric of COVID has damaged Sam's brain, or like he has Trump derangement syndrome and he's a crazy person. And but a few times I've criticized him. A lot of people have like flooded the comments. Like a couple of my criticisms of him coming from just a very scientific, objective, like journalistic level have been met with like a lot of viral clicks and views. And like one time Elon Musk responded to my tweet about criticizing Sam, and then he said something like COVID broke his brain, or like there's such a thing as like doing too much meditation has damaged Sam's brain, like things like that. And I oppose all that rhetoric, and I don't think that's healthy, and I've never engaged in it, even though my criticism has unfortunately elicited some of that more inflammatory rhetoric. But that's not what I'm about, and I still really appreciate Sam. I use his app regularly and enjoy the conversations that he has in the app on non-duality and consciousness. Like I said, I've been critical of his coverage on COVID, but I still think he's a really good guy, despite our disagreements there. And we should mention the Dave Smith podcast that I did. I think he's also been wrong about the whole conversation about misinformation and expertise. And so I was just watching his podcast with Douglas Murray in the aftermath of the Douglas Murray Dave Smith debate on Rogan, and I just saw like fallacy after fallacy coming from both Douglas and Sam. And Douglas, who I've also podcasted with before and have respect and appreciation for. So I invited Dave Smith on the podcast, and we systematically went through some of the fallacies that Sam and Douglas were saying about like saying that Dave is not much of an expert on some of these topics that he's talking about, whereas like Dave and I talked about, like Sam with his neuroscience background, Dave with his English background, regularly talk about politics and foreign affairs and economics. And so anyway, I've disagreed with him pretty vehemently on some things, but I'd love to entertain a meaningful conversation on this very important issue of how to navigate this very bizarre, complex informational landscape and podcasts and newsletters. And like Sam's really concerned about that, about misinformation, conspiracy theories, and like how do you navigate what's right and what's wrong online. So I'd love to get into that with Sam and see if we can actually come to some common understanding on those issues. And then also the topics around psychedelics and meditation and experiencing contentment in life. I'd love to get into that with him. So hopefully we can have Sam on the podcast. I think it'd be a really good conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the Dave Smith episode. There were some criticisms regarding that episode. Do you want to explain that a little bit more and your response?
Yeah, so I got a lot of heat for having Dave Smith on the podcast by a lot of more conservative-leaning people in my audience who are very pro-Israel. And Dave has become probably the most popular critic of Israel over the past couple of years with his appearances on Piers Morgan, debating a lot of people, and his appearances on Joe Rogan, and his recent debates with Steven Crowder, Coleman Hughes, and obviously the Douglas Murray one was the biggest one. And I had him on to talk about specifically, like respond to, like I just said, the Douglas Murray, Sam Harris podcast, and really delve into this conversation about misinformation and the nature of expertise. That was like 2 hours of the conversation, responding to the Sam podcast. And then the last hour was kind of more going into the substance of his views on Israel and foreign policy and jihadist terrorism and things like that. And people, I think a lot of people didn't watch the podcast and interpreted me having him on and agreeing with him on the expertise and misinformation parts of the podcast as me endorsing all of his views on Israel and foreign policy and geopolitics and Jeffrey Epstein and this, that, and the other. And the honest answer is that podcast was just focused on misinformation and expertise, like I said. And I think I did a pretty good job steel-manning the pro-Israel side to him, and steel-manning Douglas and Sam's positions on those topics specifically. And I tend to do the same when I have on some more pro-Israel guests on the podcast, is steel-manning the other side. So we'll talk about this later in the podcast too, about some people we're going to have on, but like Ben Shapiro, we're trying to get him on the podcast, and we've been coordinating with his team in the past. And so similar, with Ben or similar with Dave in a podcast with Ben possibly. I would present the anti-Israel side and really steel man that, and then have Ben respond to those arguments. Because for me, I'm not an expert in geopolitics or Israel or foreign policy. I'm just like learning about these things in real time. Don't really have strong, solidified opinions on those things. So when I have someone on, I think it's important to present the other side. And so I don't think that podcast was just me having Dave on and just like agreeing or just accepting everything at face value. I think I did a really good job playing devil's advocate at times. But this is something that really should be made clear, especially as we have some other people on in the future, which we'll talk about in a second. Me having someone on and talking about, some specific areas of agreement or disagreement doesn't mean that I endorse like everything else that they've said, because you can only get so much in a 2-hour or 3-hour conversation anyways. And so if we spend 2 hours talking about foreign policy or immigration, we didn't talk about hypothetically economics or crypto or gender dynamics, racial dynamics. So I think people sometimes confuse having someone on as just endorsing everything that they've ever said, and that's just simply not true. And so I got a lot of hate mail, a lot of people, including friends, and I think I've lost some friends too, actually, for having Dave Smith on. But I think it was really just dishonest and unfair to just attack me for just merely having Dave on, who is a nice, thoughtful, generous guy, and frequently with Dave too. For people who might appreciate this, like sometimes I'll see Dave say something about geopolitics, Israel, some like foreign conflict, and then I'll see something on the other side or a criticism of him, and then I'll send it to Dave and be like, hey, what do you think of this, man? And like I feel like there's some good points being made on the other side, and like what are your thoughts on that? Then he'll respond and we'll have like a critical conversation. Does that mean that I agree with him on everything on Israel? No. Am I an Israel expert? No. But I think it's important to have people on with different perspectives. And for what it's worth, on the misinformation and expertise side, I think Douglas and Sam got that one totally wrong. And we did give them the benefit of the doubt in the conversation and acknowledged the importance of having experts and institutional authority. And we called out, in that podcast, we explicitly called out anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories about Israel, like very clearly. People can go watch it. Like we rebuked all this very real rise in anti-Semitism after October 7th. So I think we did a very responsible, comprehensive job in that podcast. And if people want to attack me for it, I think they should first listen to that podcast, because I think it was done very responsibly.
Mm-hmm. So to switch gears a little bit, what's one major insight you've had in the past 1 to 2 months?
Yeah, so as I've already explained, I'm going more in my writing and podcasting in a self-help, self-growth direction. And so I really see this incredible opportunity and blessing to have a platform, have an audience on Substack, people who read me regularly. And so I personally feel called to think about like how I can improve my life and my relationships and my mental health. And then I feel this, opportunity to write and report about these things because I have an audience and a platform. And I'm very grateful for that. And so I'm regularly kind of thinking about deeper like spiritual and psychological things. And why I wanted to get into this question today was over the past month and a half, I've had a lot of interesting, profound conversations with people at NS, a handful of people I'm thinking of, including my friend David here, who's listening in. A few conversations that have pointed me in this direction was this insight that I've been thinking a lot about the last few days, which is the importance of like mindfully questioning, rehearsing, or practicing new psychological thought patterns. And what I mean by that is, I've been doing therapy the last 2-3 years, and I have a really good psychotherapist. And I've also talked about doing psychedelic assisted therapy like once a year and the value and benefit I've gotten out of that. And I think that's all really important. I think it's important to have a a good psychotherapist who like will listen to you and reflect back kind of what your inner traumas or struggles are, and identify different like fallacies in your thinking or different quirks in the way you approach things. But there's also potential problem, which I don't think gets enough attention, which is that it is very hard to change your thought patterns and the way you interface with reality. And I think it's very easy to have a therapy session once a week, where in my case, bring this back to my insight here. I've had some really powerful insights in therapy, and I've made a lot of progress and have changed certain things in my life and the way I approach things. But a few conversations that I had with people at NS, including one woman, she's a relationship therapist. She's kind of calls herself the goddess of love. Her name is Venus, and she'll be on the podcast at some point, actually. And a few other people have just made me realize that how quickly I can go back to old unconscious patterns, for me, of self-deprecation, shame, guilt, feeling inadequate, feeling inferior, things that have been cultivated through different experiences in childhood and middle school. Those can really quickly come up, and I've just realized that I need more conscious daily practice. And this ties to Joe Dispenza's work about who do you want to be, and like rewiring and firing new thought patterns. And so I don't think once a week therapy session and getting a lot of important insights is enough. I think daily morning like affirmations, self-reflections, like Joe Dispenza does these meditations where it's just basically like he makes you remember your old self, the old patterns, guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, whatever. And then he makes you cultivate and feel into like your new identity and who you want to be and who you are now, and going from scarcity to abundance, or from self-criticism, self-hate to self-love and self-confidence. And so I feel like more and more, like I've just had this insight that I need to be doing more daily conscious practice of new thought patterns and like the new identity that I want to cultivate and foster in my life, rather than just therapy session here and there and then just quickly going back to old patterns. So that's a big insight that I'll be writing more about on the Meta Mystic and exploring with different guests. And I think I feel very fortunate to have this platform to talk about this, because I do really care about self-growth and self-transformation, and I want to change my life, and I think I'm changing my life. But what's the best way to do that? What are the best tools, the best therapies, meditation, psychedelics, journaling, all these things I think are really important. So I'm excited to explore this more and share with people how I'm navigating this.
Yeah. Finally, the moment we've been waiting for. Rav, we're going to talk about who's coming on the podcast next. And we've been working hard behind the scenes here to get a good lineup of different interesting guests and professionals in their field. So, yeah, without further ado.
Yeah, so we've been talking to a lot of different people to have on the podcast. We already mentioned the different themes of the show. I'm excited to announce that I'm going to be hosting a friendly debate/discussion with Brett Weinstein and Jonathan Pageau. Jonathan is a Orthodox Christian carver, friend of Jordan Peterson, and famous for his conversations with Peterson and others on the symbolism and imagery and motifs in not just Christianity, but like Disney movies. And he did some recent videos on Halloween. He's a really deep thinking guy, and of course he's a Christian believer. And he had a back and forth with Brett on X recently, and he criticized Brett for some of his views on religion. Brett, who is a atheist, but he doesn't like that term and thinks that atheists get a lot wrong. So he's criticized Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris on some of their views. But they had this interesting back and forth, and then I hit up Brett, and I was like, this could be a fun conversation. And then I emailed Jonathan. They both agreed to it, so we'll do that later this month. Friendly conversation on religion and the biological, sociological evolution of religion, and going into some very deep, esoteric, philosophical themes about memes and like memetics, which Dawkins has talked about. I think it'll be a really good conversation between people who disagree on things pretty significantly, but we'll see if we can find some common ground on the nature of religion and spirituality in a modern context. And then speaking of Brett will also be on the podcast. We're coordinating dates to talk about modern dating, relationships, and sexuality from a evolutionary perspective. We'll be talking about just different trends with AI, technology, dating apps, hookup culture, party culture, and like just different things pertaining to relationships and dating from an evolutionary perspective, which I think is really interesting and doesn't get talked about enough. I think we as humans, we like to be very imaginative and visionary, but we forget that we do have biological constraints. And Brett's been a very effective communicator of that. And I got inspired to ask Brett to have that conversation because in 2019, I believe, him and Heather, I was just re-listening to the podcast, they were on Joe Rogan talking about this very subject, relationships and sexuality from an evolutionary landscape. But a lot has changed in those past 5-6 years. So people can go watch that conversation. I highly recommend it. Brett has his famous hot versus beautiful explanation, which I think is really cool. And so we're going to be following up on that conversation about what's changed since then with the growth of technology and AI. And so I talked to Brett about this already privately, and he has a lot of thoughts on this. And so we're going to be getting into that for 2-3 hours. And also political conversations. We're coordinating with people like Glenn Greenwald and Maajid Nawaz for conversations on modern media, modern journalism, geopolitics, what's happening in Israel, Ukraine. Maajid, I think, is a really intelligent thinker when it comes to geopolitics and political history. And I'm going to be engaging with him on those topics. Then Glenn, I think, is one of the best journalists in the game. And again, just to reiterate, me having these people on and agreeing with them on some things is not a blanket endorsement of everything they've ever said and all their views on everything. And in fact, when I have them on,
weird that needs to be said.
Yeah. I get a lot of hate mail for having people like that from both sides. So I need to clarify that, unfortunately. But similarly with the Dave conversation, when I have Maajid and Glenn on, I will be steel manning the other side of their opinions on various things on foreign policy and different political topics in America, like immigration, what's happening with the Trump presidency. So I look forward to those conversations. Also, Ben Shapiro, we've coordinated with him in the past. There was a scheduling conflict that prevented a podcast with him from happening several months ago. So we're going to try and reschedule that and have a conversation with him. I'd really like to get into just the political landscape of left versus right and finding the right balance. And Ben and I have been privately corresponding with him a couple times recently about some hysteria on the far right about celebrations of Diwali. There were a few very vocal conservatives who were like, the fact that Trump had people like Kash Patel and Harmeet Dillon and a few other prominent Indian folks to do a celebration of Diwali in the White House. A lot of people on, further right got very mad at that of like, oh, Trump is promoting this demonic religion and, get these unpatriotic and all these, dangerously thinking people who have all these crazy, religious views. We don't need this in our country, and it's promoting false gods, and it's, we're a Christian country, and we have to promote Jesus, and yada yada yada. And I messaged Ben about this, and we were agreeing, and Ben was like, yeah, this hysteria from the far right coming in is unhinged and crazy. And of course, the steel man of the right-wing position is that we can't be infinitely open to all these kind of diverse ideas. And countries like Europe are facing the consequences of unfettered immigration from Muslim-majority countries where people don't share similar values with respect to gender relations, gay rights, women's rights. And so there's a real conversation to have. But with Ben, I plan to really delve deeply into when the right goes too far versus when the left goes too far, and how do we navigate finding a political balance on those things. So I look forward to that with Ben, hopefully, and then some dating coaches and relationship experts like Elsa Morak. She's a very popular dating coach who's trying to help young men with nice guy syndrome. So we'll talk about that. and Kamna Bojwani. She's a sexologist, and we're going to be talking about the modern landscape of sexuality and dating. That'll be an interesting, more spicy conversation. That'll be kind of coming out of left field for my listeners. So yeah, those are some of the people coming up. A lot of other people that we're looking at in the psychology, wellness, and mental health space, like Dr. K. Love to get him on the podcast. Gabor Mate. Also love to get on. A bunch of other neuroscientists, and like Andrew Huberman. Also love to get him on. So hope to connect with those people and invite them here to Network School for in-person conversations. We already mentioned Sam Harris. I would love to have him on as well. So a lot of exciting guests from different areas: politics, wellness, psychology, dating. So really hoping to provide a very eclectic, diverse, healthy diet to my audience that's not just like bitching about left and right and like political issues, but also like providing proactive and useful knowledge for how people can change their life in dating, relationships, mental health, etc. So really looking forward to those conversations.
Amazing. Yeah, if you like this type of content, please let us know in the comments. And if you could like and subscribe to the episode and the channel, that would be great and a lot of help. Is there anything else you want to say, Rav, as we close?
No, yeah, I'm just really, happy to be here. I think we should take a second to just express gratitude for, Balaji for, having us here in the network school. Again, meeting lots of cool people, making new friends, new energies, new ideas, new inspiration. I'm excited to take this podcast in its next kind of evolutionary stage into less political topics and more wellness and relationship topics. And, we've also talked about, I know there will be a lot of people who are not interested in that, and people who want me to talk about politics and big pharma and COVID and the globalist agenda and this, that, and the other. And I'm not saying those topics are not important, but for me right now, I'm more interested in issues pertaining to young people as they navigate this brave new world of technology and relationships. And, a lot of people are struggling with mental health issues. So I feel really called to talk about that. And if you're not interested in that, I'm sorry. What can I say? I'm just veering less and less in the political direction and more in the self-growth and wellness direction. And so we hope to find new audience members and maybe people who don't know what I'm about and don't know the illusion of consensus and its origins with Jay Bhattacharya during COVID. We were doing the podcast together for a long time, and it's evolved in a lot of ways. But we hope to find new people who appreciate what we're doing and like the kind of content that we're providing. And we'll keep doing what we're doing and navigating some of these new topics. And I hope also some of my listeners and readers of the past few years can also appreciate the evolution and exploration of new topics. I'd be curious to get feedback. So leave your comments on Substack when I post these podcasts there. People can subscribe to the Substack and they can get the podcasts straight to their email inbox. The Illusion of Consensus and then the Meta Mystic is my place for more personal essays on self-growth and self-improvement. And subscribe to the YouTube channel, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. And look forward to the next episode.
All right. Thanks, everybody.